last half-century or so, it's fair to say this work began, or the seeds of this work began, in Western Pennsylvania through a very enlightened team at Carnegie Mellon University, where I had the privilege of working, and they grew in that university and in that city a series of Renaissance programs working with communities to the benefit of, if you will, the whole community, the social, economic, and environmental well-being of those communities. That was at the time of the civil riots in the United States, and the work that was done by architects and architecture schools in the 70s and the 80s were very much kind of draw down from that rather bad experience. We're not quite starting in that position at the present time, but we have got problems in many of our towns and cities across Britain, problems of social and economic and perhaps especially environmental. And it's on those points, and in trying to offer you, if I may, that contextual frame, how it began, very tersely, but how it began, where the stepping stones that it went to, particularly in Yorkshire, where Brian and Stuart, who is in the audience, worked with me on the programme down there, and how now it's coming to Scotland. And if I may just stay with Scotland, not at that point in time, we're not replicating something here. We're not taking something that happened in Pittsburgh and bringing it direct to Scotland. The programme's always grown, it's changed wherever it's been, it's become something different, and it's often become something better. And I have to say that that is exactly what's happened in East Renfrewshire. It has become a deeper seated programme, there's no doubt about that. And it has secured, more than anything else, what I now choose to refer to as a very special relationship. A special relationship between the community, which is Neilston, and its local authority. A new kind of sense of civic pride and civic responsibility within that community for its own future, very much supported and, if you will, partnered by the local authority. But in addition to all of that, I've already referred to Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, we have what has been dubbed the Remaking Cities Institute. It has come out of the schools of architecture. And I think it's fair to say that the earlier responses to the problems that were being experienced in the United States back in the 70s and the early 80s were very much driven by responses that were being made, curiously, by built environment professionals. Very often, specifically by the universities and the schools of architecture through their outreach programs, always in collaboration with other agencies, obviously, government, local and national. But I think that's an important point. And here in East Renfrewshire, you will be aware from some of the documentation that the Macintosh School is again centrally involved in the work that we are doing here. In the United States, the programme was not always referred to as Renaissance. The word Renaissance was used ubiquitously, but it was referred to as a RUDAP programme, a Regional Urban Design Assistance Team programme, a bit of a mouthful. But a very successful programme, and just as a touchstone, the number of towns that we'd hit by the early 1990s are roughly replicated on that plan. So quite a substantial rollout across the nation. And the processes through which we worked and grew these Renaissance projects, these community delivering plans, economic, social and environmental for the future, follow very similar processes to the one that we've adopted here in East Renfrewshire. But the essential part of the programmes were to do with working with the community, always working with the community, and the growing of those special relationships that I've talked about. And through that process, the generation of master planning. We are currently in Carnegie Mellon working on a neighbourhood of Pittsburgh, out-of-town neighbourhood called Hazelwood. Remaking Hazelwood, as you can see. And I get to just mention this again in passing. This is the current work that's going on at CMU, as I say. Hazelwood is a community very, very similar in size to Neilston. And I'm trying to set up some comparatives there further down the line between the experiences that we're enjoying here in Neilston and we're also building up in Hazelwood. So this is going on around the world, if you will, in other places. I know this kind of work's happening in Australia. I know from last week a conference at in Manchester, it's happening in South Africa, it's happening across the States, as I've already said. So we're part in this process of something really quite big and as I say, around the world. When I came back, well, not so much come back, but came back to Britain for a period of time from CMU, I learnt about a programme that was just emerging in Yorkshire, called the Urban Renaissance Programme. Brian and Stuart, I've already referred to, worked with me on this exercise, and this was an attempt to respond to the Lord Rogers Task Force report, which some of you will know about. which itself was a call to making our towns beautiful again. No apologies for using that word, beautiful again, but also on sound economic and social principles. We scoped out in the process of a 4 or 5 year programme for Yorkshire, projects in a number of towns. It's important to add there that this is not just design for design's sake. This is not just a bunch of architects in flowery ties coming and painting the buildings white and going away again. This is very deep-seated economic and social strategy. And it's firmly linked, or was firmly linked in the Yorkshire experience, to what they call their regional economic strategy. So it was about jobs, it was about business, it was about improving economic performance. But doing that through design and creating beautiful environments in which these things can grow and happen. The essential parts of that process were to do with the town teams. You know a little bit about town teams from the documentation, but also the use of a panel of facilitators, which you may not know too much about, but Nielsen has enjoyed that same panel of facilitators, helping them to interpret, to articulate, to draw to write the aspirations that have been drawn down, if you will, by the community through the several workshops that have taken place. And you know, 3 or 4 of the towns, the more successful towns out of a dozen or so, Wakefield, Doncaster, Scarborough, all have their own very different stories to tell. The experiences were really very, very different from one town to another, as indeed they have been here in Neilston. And perhaps at the very core of the core, and I've used this word design already, I've talked about architects and architecture, but the issue of the urban design protocol, as I choose to call it, and the making of a kind of urban design strategy. I don't like to use these phrases too much, but I hope you know what I mean. But the urban design, 3-dimensional social policy, social and economic policy, 3-dimensional social and economic policy, is at the very core of this thing. So creating beautiful towns and cities again is at the core of an economic and social agenda. And the delivery of an urban design strategy is absolutely central and crucial to the exercise. Just looking a little bit to the future, we are currently growing our work, the model, if you will, through the towns, the rural settings, the smaller towns and medium-sized towns in Yorkshire, but now we're beginning to be challenged, and we're looking forward to the challenge to the bigger cities. And the Renaissance Neighbourhoods programme, which I hope you'll all learn something more about in due course. We're about to rise to that occasion in North Glasgow in the coming months and year or so. And if I can just get to this last slide, if it will allow me, the Neilston programme has, in similar ways to others, produced its own town charter. Very good.